Max shook hands with the little robot. "Friends forever?" Max asked. "Forever," said the robot. When 12-year-old Max sneaks into SpaceCamp to learn how to be an astronaut, he hopes to get on a good team. Instead, he meets 4 teenagers who don't want to be his friends. Max's only friend is Jinx, the little robot who helps out at SpaceCamp. Can their instructor, Andy, help them all become a real team? And will SpaceCamp prepare them for the adventure of a lifetime?
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. All 3 engines up and burning. 2, 1, 0, and liftoff. The final liftoff of Atlantis on the shoulders of the space shuttle. America will continue the dream.
SpaceCamp, a novelization for young readers by B.B. Hiller and Neil W. Hiller, based on the screenplay by W.W. Wicket and K.C.T. Mitchell, and story by Patrick Bailey and Larry B. Williams. Narrated by Jon Olsen. For our campers, Emmons and Andy, BBH and NWH. 1. "Come, Max. Hurry, Max." With a faint whirr, the robot's arm extended toward Max, pointing across the road that led from Junior SpaceCamp to Senior SpaceCamp. A mechanical hand clamped onto Max's coverall sleeve and tugged. "Car is coming down the road. 63.29 miles per hour. Unsafe for Max. Unsafe for Jinx." With that, Jinx the robot dived into the underbrush on the far side of the dirt road. Max scrambled after him, reaching safety just in time. A Jeep convertible shot past them on the road, leaving a cloud of dust and a blast of rock music hanging in the air behind it. When the car was out of sight, Max and Jinx continued their secret journey. Max could hardly believe it. He was going to SpaceCamp, the real thing. For 2 summers he'd gone to Junior SpaceCamp. Now, at 12, he was still supposed to be too young for Senior SpaceCamp, but he was going to sneak in anyway. Nothing was going to stop him. Jinx was a 3.5-foot-tall robot. He had a large round body and long spindly arms and legs. He was a prototype maintenance droid, officially named MP-16347-JX. The JX part was where Jinx got his nickname. NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, built Jinx for use on the space station. Then NASA discovered that Jinx's shielding didn't work. That made Jinx useless in space. So NASA made him useful fixing things on Earth and helping out at SpaceCamp. Some people said Jinx was a $27 million handyman. That was okay as far as Max was concerned. Jinx was coming in very handy for him. They had become friends at Junior SpaceCamp. It was Jinx who had figured out that Max could get to Senior SpaceCamp simply by showing up and pretending that he belonged there. At least that was what Max thought Jinx meant when he had said, "Follow me, then belong where you are." Now, if only they could complete the journey to SpaceCamp without needing to dodge any more crazy drivers. Together they pushed through the bushes surrounding the senior camp. Max spotted the headquarters, HQ, building, and the dorms, as well as the testing area and the equipment huts. It was there. It was real. It was SpaceCamp. Max was afraid he'd be discovered, but it turned out he didn't have anything to worry about. Nobody was looking at him. Everybody was watching the sky, where a single-engine plane soared over the camp runway. 2. The plane landed smoothly and taxied to the small terminal building. Catherine Fairley, the 18-year-old girl who had been at the controls, emerged from the plane's small door. The watching crowd clapped for her expert landing. Max and Jinx cut across the runway, heading for the parking lot next to the SpaceCamp HQ building. The parking lot was a confusion of campers, duffel bags, and parents. Nobody was paying any attention to Max in that crowd. "I'm okay, Jinx," he told the robot. "I can make it from here." "Okay, Max. Okay, Max," the robot echoed, and then headed back to junior camp alone. "Bye, Max. See Max later." Beeping and whistling, Jinx rolled away. Max looked up. Nearby, Jon Olsen sat behind the wheel of his Jeep, the car that Jinx and Max had dodged. Kevin was listening to his tape deck. Everyone nearby was also listening to Kevin's tape deck because he was playing it so loudly. Using the car's rear-view mirror, Kevin combed his wavy brown hair and adjusted his stylish sunglasses. The camp director, Zach Bergstrom, walked over to the car. "Would you mind turning that down?" he asked. "No sweat," Kevin answered, turning the dial a very little bit. Zach reached through the window to the controls and turned the tape player all the way down. "You want SpaceCamp?" he asked. "No," Kevin answered. "My father wants SpaceCamp. I want my head examined." Zach ignored Kevin's rudeness and told him where to sign in. Reluctantly, Kevin removed his gear from his car and went to the HQ. The next camper to arrive was Tish Ambrose. Max stared at her. Perhaps she'd made a mistake and thought this was some kind of costume party. Tish was certainly dressed for one. She was wearing a multicolored shirt over a white t-shirt and a black miniskirt. Her hair was done up in frizzy curls, and her earrings were an amazing collection of day-glow plastic that matched her bracelets. The next camper Max saw was Rudy Tyler. Rudy was tall, thin, and black. While Max watched, Rudy solemnly kissed his mother and shook his father's hand. Then he picked up a duffel bag and slung it onto his shoulder. When he leaned over to pick up his other bag, the first one tumbled over his head, knocking his camera to the ground. When he reached for his camera, his fishing pole slipped out of its case and clattered down to the concrete. It rolled under a car. Rudy crawled under the car to get his fishing pole. His long legs stuck out, nearly tripping his father. Max couldn't watch anymore. He'd seen enough misfit campers for one day. He walked toward the HQ, where, Max knew, Zach would be organizing the teams of students who would work together for the 3 weeks of SpaceCamp. Max knew about the team organization because he'd tried to get assigned to a senior camp team in each of his 2 previous summers. He hoped he'd finally make it this year. Before Max got to the HQ door, the young pilot, Catherine Fairley, strode up to him. Her clothes and hair were carefully arranged. She was wearing a white sweatshirt. Max read the words lettered on the sweatshirt. On the front it said, "If we can send a man to the moon, ... Catherine brushed past Max and pulled the door open. It seemed as if she hadn't even seen him. On the back of her sweatshirt it said, ... Why not send them all? Max thought that sending all men to the moon was a great idea, as long as he could go too. Max stepped inside the HQ building. The door closed behind him. 3. The campers walked past a table covered with colored name tags. Max knew from experience at Junior SpaceCamp that the colors were for teams. He also knew that teamwork was what SpaceCamp was all about. If you got on a good team, everything was great. If you got on a bad team, SpaceCamp would be no fun. Blue was the color of the sky. It was Max's favorite color. He grabbed a blue name tag and filed into the auditorium with the rest of the campers. Up on the stage, Zach spoke to the campers. "My name is Zach Bergstrom, and I'm the director of SpaceCamp." He stared out at the group in front of him. "SpaceCamp is for everyone who will be part of the world's future. Whatever you plan to be as an adult, the future is in space, and you are part of the future. While you're here, you'll be learning about space travel today and tomorrow, but perhaps most important, you'll learn how to work as a team. Max knew these things, but he liked to hear them anyway. He liked Zach and his wife, Andy, who was one of the senior counselors at the camp. They were both astronauts themselves, and that made SpaceCamp all the more real. Zach continued speaking. "We're going to train you just like NASA trains astronauts. Check that out. I don't say real astronauts because at SpaceCamp you are real astronauts." The campers looked around at each other, excited. "Now you've all been assigned to crews. For the next 3 weeks, you eat together, think together, breathe together. You are teams. Now go meet your teammates and your crew leaders. Dismissed!" Quickly, the campers broke into groups by team color. Max was more than a little dismayed to see that his group seemed to have in it all the weirdos he'd watched arrive at camp. The good news, though, was their counselor. "I'm Andy Bergstrom," she told them, checking their names against the list on her clipboard. "I'm your team leader." "You're an astronaut," Catherine said, awed. "First female pilot." "I hope to be," Andy corrected her. "I haven't been into space yet." "Right, I read about you. You were backup pilot on the first Discovery flight, but Coates got it instead." "Yeah, I remember," Andy said dully. Catherine realized that she'd hurt Andy's feelings, and she was sorry. Of course, Andy must have been very disappointed when she didn't go on the Discovery flight. Andy turned to Rudy. "Hello, what's your name?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am, Rudy Tyler, ma'am," he told her, gagging on some gum. "Spit it out, Rudy." "Rudy Tyler, ma'am," he said. "I meant the gum, Rudy. Spit that out." He swallowed it. "Okay, Rudy, I'm making you Mission Specialist, Equipment Function and Operation." "Ma'am, I'm not really good under pressure," he protested. "You'll do fine," Andy told him. Max wasn't so sure. He recalled Rudy's clumsiness with the duffel bags and his fishing pole. Andy turned to the next camper. "Hi, Andy. I'm Tish Ambrose." When she moved, there was a soft clatter from her plastic jewelry. "What brings you to SpaceCamp, Tish?" Andy asked. Max thought perhaps the answer might be a flying saucer. Tish did not appear to be from this planet. "I did this audit at JPL, you know, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, in radio astronomy. It was unreal, you know, listening to radio waves from space. I mean, like waiting for signs of intelligence." "Uh-huh," Andy nodded. "I know the feeling. All right, Tish, you're Mission Specialist number 2, Communications." She made a note on her clipboard. "Next!" It was Max. Andy knew him from Junior Space Camp. "Max, what are you doing here?" "Checking in for my next mission against the Empire, Your Highness." "Your mission is to get yourself back to Junior Camp, Max." "Aw, come on, Andy. I've been there for 2 summers now. I belong here. Don't kick me out." "How old are you now, Max?" "What is this, age discrimination? I'm 12. So?" "And how tall are you now, Max?" 1.47 meters. And growing." "You're just not ready." Andy sighed. "I am too ready," Max told her. Even he was surprised at how sharply he'd spoken. Andy looked at him. Her experiences waiting for a mission made her understand Max's ambitions. She decided to let him try. "Okay, you're payload specialist. One mistake, and you're on your way back. Got it?" Max grinned. "Copy, Rogue Leader. Roger and out." Max couldn't believe it. He'd actually made it to Senior Space Camp. So far. "Next," Andy said. "I'm Kevin Donaldson," the Jeep's driver told her. "And I'm Catherine Fairley," said the airplane pilot. 2 positions left, Andy told them. Pilot and shuttle commander. "Kevin, tell me why you'd like to be commander." "I wouldn't. I'd rather be king, supreme leader, something like that." "Catherine?" Andy asked. I enjoy responsibility, Catherine answered. I know a lot about the space program. I'm going to the Air Force Academy. I can do the job. You think it's the most important job? Andy asked. Well, yes, Catherine answered. It's okay. Let her have it. I don't care anyway, Kevin said. Well, Andy told Kevin, it's about time you did start caring, so I'm making you shuttle commander. Catherine, you're pilot. Andy made some final notes on her clipboard and then looked up at the blue team. Okay, that completes your assignments. Now go check into your bunks and meet me in Building A in a half hour. She spun on her heel and walked away. The team members picked up their bags and headed for the dorms. On the way they passed a soda machine. Rudy paused, groping for change in his pocket. Anybody got a quarter? He asked, spilling pennies on the floor. That won't be necessary, Max told him. Max knew just what he was doing. With his left hand, he swung a big circular punch at the machine, landing in the middle of the O on Coke. There was a pause. Then, thud, 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 thud. Out rolled 14 cans of soda. The blue team members each grabbed a couple and continued across the courtyard to the dorm. What teamwork! They forgot just one thing. Hey, don't everybody thank me at once, Max said, trailing after them. They didn't. 4. On the second day of SpaceCamp, Andy showed the blue team the simulator room. The simulator room had a space shuttle cockpit in it. It had all of the controls of the actual shuttle. The cabin could turn, rise, and fall as the simulator controls were used. Around the front of the cabin was a movie screen that showed exactly what a pilot would see in flight. This is the shuttle simulator, Andy told the blue team. In here you will learn to fly at the speed of sound. It looks complicated, but it's really no harder than driving a car. Max gulped. He couldn't drive a car. Andy continued. The computer does most of the work. The team looked over the lights, dials, switches, and buttons inside the cockpit. Max couldn't believe he'd ever actually know what all those instruments did. Andy went on talking, but Rudy couldn't keep his eyes or his hands off the controls. Okay, let's get started with your first lesson, Andy began, as Rudy twisted one of the dials. Suddenly she was interrupted. The simulator cockpit tilted sharply to the right, then to the left, then to the right again. It happened so fast that it was over before they'd had a chance to notice what had happened. Andy cleared her throat. And the title of your first lesson is Why I Won't Touch Anything Until I Know How to Use It. Right, Rudy? She asked. Rudy smiled sheepishly and nodded. Right, Andy. You can count on it, he answered, but he was still running his fingers lightly over the control panel. Later, Andy took the team into the Space Museum. While Andy showed the team some exhibits from space missions, Kevin yawned and leaned against a model of the first Mercury space capsule, ignoring a big sign that read, "Do not touch." Suddenly, a spidery metal arm slammed across Kevin's chest. It shoved him away from the Mercury model. "Hey, what's going on?" Kevin said, surprised. The team members were frightened, all except Max. He laughed. So did Andy. To the surprise of the rest of the team, a robot scooted out from behind the Mercury model. He beeped twice, whistled once, and raised his scanner, glaring at Kevin. "This is Jinx," Andy introduced the robot to the team. Jinx still scanned Kevin. "Do not touch," Jinx said to Kevin. "Sign says, do not touch." "He can talk?" Kevin said, awed. "Yes," Max told him. "He helps out around the Kennedy Space Center and here at camp," Andy told them. Then a man spoke from inside one of the model space capsules. "Jinx, where the heck is that darn ratchet?" Jinx trundled back to his job, grabbing the ratchet from the toolkit on his way. The repairman who had spoken stuck his hand out, reaching blindly for the ratchet. Max slapped it efficiently into the man's waiting hand, and then answered his question. "Darn ratchet is in your hand," Jinx told him. The team laughed. "Jinx is a useful helper, but he's very literal," Andy told them. "We have to be careful what we say to him. I mean, if you ask him to make your bed, he'll go out and get all the materials necessary to make a bed. He won't just straighten out the sheets and put the spread on." There was no way the blue team could know then just how much trouble the helpful droid could cause. 5. During the next few days, the blue team plunged into its lessons on space. First, they had to learn about weightlessness, which the SpaceCamp instructors called 0G, meaning no gravity. Andy explained to the Blues that in space, because there is no gravity, people and things float freely, something like they do in water, only more so. In space, there is no force to pull anything or to slow anything down. If something begins moving in one direction, it will continue moving in that direction at the same speed, forever. Each planet and moon, Andy said, has a gravity that is different from the gravity on Earth. On Earth's moon, for instance, the gravity is 1/6 of what it is on Earth. That means... "It means I don't have to go on a diet, right?" Tish asked. "Well, let's see," Andy said. She showed them the moonwalkers. These were spring-loaded contraptions that multiplied the movement of the person in it 6 times. That meant that if somebody jumped enough to lift themselves 1 foot off the ground on Earth, they'd go 6 feet off the ground with the moonwalker. It was just like walking on the moon. For the first time, Kevin enjoyed SpaceCamp. He thought moonwalking was really fun. He bent his knees and pushed. The next thing he knew, he shot 10 feet into the air. It was more fun than driving his Jeep. Down he came, and then up again, this time jumping forward as well. Next to him, Rudy went up 8 feet. Max, Catherine, and Tish bumped into each other, landing softly and bouncing up again. Max bounced off the wall into Rudy. When Rudy bounced up again, his springs got tangled with Kevin's. They rolled over onto the floor, blocking Catherine's way. She veered to the right, smashing into Tish. Tish began spinning and twisting, and soon tangled her springs with Max's. Within seconds, all 5 members of the blue team were piled on the floor, giggling. Their springs were hopelessly knotted. They had never had more fun. They had never learned less. Andy shook her head in despair. She had never seen such an unruly, unlikely group of space campers. "This is the future?" she asked herself. 6. Later that day, the blue team was working on the computers at the camp's mission control mock-up room. At least, that's what they were supposed to be doing. Andy checked their progress. She walked behind Catherine and was pleased to see her fingers flying over the terminal keyboard. At least Catherine was doing everything right. Andy moved on to Tish. Her fingers were flying over the terminal keyboard too. But there was nothing on the terminal screen. Movement near the floor caught Andy's attention. She looked down. There was Rudy on the floor, his leg wrapped around the chair. The cord for Tish's computer had come unplugged and was wrapped around Rudy's leg. Andy couldn't bear to watch any more. She walked over to Max. He was pounding furiously at the keys. The screen was filled with lines, dots, and diagrams. "What's this?" Andy asked, puzzled. "High-speed crisis vehicle maneuvering," Max answered. "Where'd you learn about that?" "My final mission against Death Star 2. We blew it to eternity. And Darth Vader, my father, died before I could—" "Right, Commander Skywalker," Andy said. "As you were." Max returned his attention to the computer. When Andy got to Kevin, he was asleep. She jostled him. "Where's your program?" she asked. He looked sheepishly at his watch. "Days of Our Lives doesn't start for another 10 minutes, he answered, and dropped his head back onto his arms. After their session in the Mission Control Center, Andy took the blue team into a different section of the training center. "Okay," she told the team. Now we are going to see what is considered by most the toughest part of NASA's training. It's the multi-axis trainer? Tish asked. Yes. How did you know? I read about it, Tish answered. Really? And what else did you learn about it? Andy challenged her. Well, the multi-axis trainer is 3 concentric circles spinning in different directions simultaneously. Object to stabilize from central point utilizing hand controls. Andy's mouth opened in amazement. So did the other team members. The campers didn't know what she was talking about. You're right, of course, Andy told her. But how did you remember that? Oh, I remember everything I read, Tish said offhandedly. I mean, it's a real drag. Like, my mind gets totally cluttered. Comes in handy for, like, exams, you know, though? You have a photographic memory, Catherine asked, her voice filled with envy. Yeah, Tish told her. You guys want to talk about something else? Right, Andy said. Let's talk about the multi-axis trainer. This makes you feel like you're in a space capsule tumbling out of control while it returns to Earth. If that happens, the astronaut only has a few seconds to control the capsule before it burns up. Okay, you try it first, Kevin. Kevin stepped into the trainer and strapped himself in. He held tight to the controls and nodded, asking that the machine be turned on. Suddenly, Kevin was being spun around like a combination spin cycle, roller coaster, and skydive. The team members watched him. The look on his face, when they could see it, told them he was totally confused and very scared. Nothing he did with the controls in his hands helped. In fact, he was only making it worse. Andy stopped the machine and helped Kevin out of the trainer. He stumbled into Rudy, clutching for dear life. It wasn't any big deal, he joked. But if you could make the room stop spinning, I would be grateful. One after another, they all tried the multi-axis trainer and found it impossible to control. Then it was Catherine's turn. Catherine really wanted to be an astronaut. SpaceCamp wasn't just a lark for her. It was her future. She desperately wanted to succeed. Determined, she strapped herself into the trainer. Catherine saw Andy throw the switch. Suddenly, nothing was where it was supposed to be. Catherine couldn't tell which way was up, and even if she made a good guess, she couldn't react quickly enough to keep it that way. Grab your control stick, Andy encouraged her. Take it with your right hand. I'm trying, but... Come on, if you want to be an astronaut, you're going to have to do this. Pull on the stick, Catherine. Catherine tried, but she couldn't get the machine under control. Andy threw the switch, stopping the motion. Why did you stop? Catherine asked. I'd have gotten it in another minute. Another minute on re-entry and you'd have burned up. Come on, we're running late. Catherine wouldn't be stopped, though. She couldn't stand failure. I can do it. You're not giving me a chance. Andy looked at Catherine. She could see that Catherine really cared. Andy understood about needing a chance to succeed. All right, 5 more minutes, she said. Good luck. Catherine took a deep breath. Andy looked at her steadily, and when Catherine nodded her head that she was ready, Andy gave her a thumbs up before flipping the switch. The blue team watched. The machine spun wildly, faster and faster. It was almost impossible to see Catherine. They couldn't imagine how she could control it. But suddenly it didn't seem to be going so fast anymore. It certainly wasn't spinning as much as before. Then they realized it wasn't spinning at all. Catherine had done it. Seven. That night, in the boys' dorm, Kevin was walking down the hall when he heard a ruckus. There was a lot of giggling and yelling. There were also some beeps and whistles that sounded familiar. Kevin was worried. He barged into the room. Nobody paid any attention to him. What he saw was a group of green team members huddled around something. "Where'd you get it from anyway?" one of the green teamers said. "Let's take a look." "No," was the furious reply. "It was Max." "Come on, kid, we're not going to hurt it. We just want to check it out." "No, leave him alone," Max said. "You're frightening him." "Hey, what's going on?" Kevin demanded. "Look at what this kid's got," a boy started to explain to Kevin. "Why don't you evaporate, laser brain?" Max said fiercely. "It's okay, Max," Kevin assured him. "I'll help." But he wasn't really much help. One of the bullies stepped aside. There was Jinx, hiding in a closet. The suction cups of both his arms held him high up on the wall. His leg units kicked uselessly. The light on his dome glowed bright purple. He was squeaking and whistling loudly. The green team thought it was very funny. "Out of sight," one of them said. Obediently, Jinx responded. "Out of sight, beyond the visual capabilities of the human eye. When an object is out of sight, two options, radar and sonar. Radar is an acronym for radio detecting and ranging. Sonar is an acronym for sound." "Jinx, cancel," Max told the little robot. "Okay, now, get down." The other boys watched, awed, as Jinx slowly climbed down the wall. "What does it do?" "Anything you ask him to," Max told him. "Sure moves slow," the bully said. "Hey, Jinx, shake a leg." Jinx lifted one of his spidery legs and began to shake it. The boys stared at him until they realized what they'd done. "Oh, man, you mean he does exactly what he's told? Hey, Jinx, over here." Jinx spun, and he approached the boy who called him. But then they all started giving him orders. "Hey, Jinx, hang a right. Over to the left. Shake the other leg. Jump, Jinx, jump." While Max and Kevin watched helplessly, Jinx spun around, beeping and tweeting, desperately trying to do everything he was told to do. His arms and feet shot this way and that while he rose and lowered himself. "Stop it!" Max yelled. The boys stopped talking and just watched the little robot, still trying to keep up with their commands. Jinx began spinning on his casters, making desperate electronic noises. Finally, Jinx lowered himself to the cold floor, stuck his arms and feet into the air, and wheezed. His light went out. He was still and silent. The bullies from the green team shrugged and walked out of the room, leaving Jinx with Max and Kevin. Max ran over to his electronic friend and tried to comfort the robot, but there was no response. "Sorry, kid," Kevin told Max. But Max didn't hear Kevin. The only thing he could see or hear was his robot friend, Jinx. Max picked up Jinx and held him like a baby, cradled in his arms. Kevin didn't see the tears in Max's eyes, but he knew they were there. 8. "Generator's okay. Monitor is clean. Legs are fixed. Okay, Jinx, let's see how it goes." Max worked in the silent darkness of the Space Museum. He'd borrowed tools and Jinx's blueprints from the maintenance room. He knew he could get into trouble, but Jinx was his only friend at SpaceCamp. He'd do anything for Jinx. He picked up the screwdriver and replaced the final circuit boards, checking to make sure everything he'd taken out had gotten put back. He replaced the front cover. Then the last screw was in. It was time for the big test. "Yo, Jinx," he asked. At first there was nothing. Then a whir and a beep, and then the dome light glowed a healthy pink. "Yo, Max," Jinx replied. Max grinned and put away the tools. "I can't believe those green team jerks did that to you," he told Jinx. "They ought to be zapped." Jinx turned, his command light flashing. He started toward the door. "Where are you going?" Max asked. "To zap them," Jinx answered. "No, no, Jinx, cancel. Why do you have to take everything so literally?" "How else to take it?" Jinx asked. He seemed concerned to have disappointed Max. "It's okay, Jinx. You're really special." "You too, Max," Jinx said tenderly. "Friends forever?" Max asked. "Forever," Jinx said. They shook on it. "I wish all my friends were as good as robots. In fact," Max told Jinx, "I don't think I have any friends. Sometimes I wish I didn't have to be with people at all. They always let you down. I wish... You know what I wish, Jinx?" "What?" the robot asked eagerly. "I wish I could be someplace where there were no people to hurt me, or insult me, or be cruel. I wish I were in space." "Yo, Max," Jinx said, his command light flashing. 9. Later that night there was a familiar whirring sound along the darkened corridors at HQ. Next came the quick flash of a red light, followed by 3 quick beeps and a whistle. Jinx was rolling down the hall, his command light blinking. Out the door he went, sliding down the ramp into the parking area. Almost soundlessly now, he moved along the long driveway to the highway. Left turn. A few cars and trucks passed Jinx. None of the drivers saw him in the overcast night. Nothing could stop Jinx on his mission. When Jinx reached the entrance to the Kennedy Space Center, he rolled up to the gate and punched in his own security code on the panel at the security booth. At the sound of the beeps, the security guard looked up. "Hey, Jinx," he said. Jinx beeped twice in response. The gate swung open. Jinx rolled inside. Jinx entered the main computer room, pausing only a moment to listen for the guard. When the guard passed, Jinx proceeded to the plug bank and linked himself to the mainframe computer. There was a momentary delay. Then the computer monitor flashed to life and the vocal mechanism was turned on. "Enter authorization code," the computer instructed Jinx. "MP-16347-JX, Jinx supplied. "Hello, Jinx," the computer greeted him. "How can NASA help you?" "Put Max in space," Jinx said. There was a delay while the computer searched its memory banks. "There is no Max listed in the astronaut program," the computer said. Jinx shot a few bytes of information into the memory bank. "There is now," he said, satisfied. Jinx rolled back into the darkness of the hallway and headed once again for the highway. 10. "Come on, Rudy," Catherine said, annoyed. "Would you make up your mind? Do we connect part 37A first, or 39B? "I think it's 37A, he answered. Then, "I'm not sure. It's hard to think when you're weightless." They weren't exactly weightless, but the closest thing to it on Earth. Rudy and Catherine were underwater, in a swimming pool. They were wearing spacesuits with radios in the helmets. The outfits gave them air to breathe and kept them from floating to the surface. That way they could work something like the way they would in space. They were pretending to be in space, putting together a model of the space station Daedalus. The real thing was hundreds of miles above them. Then Tish joined them. "You're not weightless, Rudy? You're witless. It's 39B first. I remember looking at the book." "No, I think it's 37A. Do you have it?" "Rudy," Catherine said, exasperated. "What's going on down there?" Kevin asked from above. "Come on, Rudy, like the whole world is waiting, know what I mean?" Tish scolded. Kevin floated down from above, kicking Catherine with his clumsy boot. Startled, she toppled, banging into the delicate struts of the space station. Tish reached to steady her, but then her end of the solar panel slipped out of her hand. "I can't hold it," Rudy said, releasing his end too. The solar panel floated quickly to the surface of the pool, knocking out 2 other solar panels on the way. While the teenagers struggled underwater, Max sat glumly at the side of the pool. He was still so upset about what had happened to Jinx that he didn't want to participate in anything. Jinx, unaware of Max's mood, rolled up behind him and pushed him into the pool. "Practice, practice," he said sternly to Max, who looked at him bewildered. Just then, 3 solar panels and 4 suited-up campers popped to the surface of the pool. "I don't believe this," Andy muttered in astonishment. "The real space station went up faster than this." 11. Tish and Catherine stared at the announcements on the bulletin board. "What's FRF?" Tish asked. "Beats me." "That stands for Flight Readiness Firing," said Zach, who stood nearby. "What's that?" "That's how NASA tests the shuttle's main engines. This is the first year we got permission for you kids to experience an FRF. Some of you will even sit in the shuttle and get an astronaut's point of view." "Wow," said Tish, truly awed. "Sounds like, real exciting." Real exciting, said Jinx, rolling by. His scanners began flashing. The day before the FRF, the blue team had its simulation flight. The simulation flights in the simulator room were the highlight of SpaceCamp. At least they were supposed to be. It was a chance to test almost everything the campers were learning about spaceflight, from takeoff, through weightless maneuvers, to re-entry and landing. The 5 campers took their seats in the cockpit mock-up of the shuttle Atlantis. Kevin sat in the commander's seat on the left-hand side. Catherine was to his right. Rudy was behind them, ready to control the RMS, Remote Manipulator System, for satellite recovery by Max. The RMS arm could reach out of the shuttle and hold an astronaut while he or she worked in space. Tish stood by the airlock door to help Max. At first, everything sounded very smooth and official. Range scale at orbit on primary, Kevin said. Roger, secondary, Catherine confirmed. Enter orbital maneuvering system burn program, pilot, Kevin ordered. Roger, OMS-1, Commander. Stand by, pilot, he told her. They waited for their orders from Mission Control. There was a crackling on their radio. Atlantis, this is Control. We have orbit confirmed. 125 nautical miles, inclination of 35 degrees. You are in a position for satellite recovery. That was Tish's cue. Roger, Control, she said. Airlock open. Activating cargo bay doors. She hit a switch that opened the large double doors where the satellite would be stowed. In the cargo bay, Max was completely covered by a white EVA, for extravehicular activity, suit. He lumbered reluctantly to the RMS arm and climbed into the chair that was at the end of it. How come I have to do all the dangerous stuff? He grumbled. Come on, Max, Catherine said over the intercom. Dale Gardner and Joe Allen did this on Discovery 51A. That didn't make Max feel any better at all. He strapped himself in carefully. Tish helped, and then opened the airlock hatch for him. You're on, Rudy. Rudy began the RMS arm maneuver smoothly. Max sighed with relief. It wasn't so bad after all. But then Rudy knocked an elbow on the bulkhead, hitting his funny bone. Ouch! He yowled, flinging his clipboard across the cabin and throwing the RMS control switch way over to the left. Yow! Rudy! Max yelled as he was swung over the top of the shuttle where he was suspended, bouncing helplessly, hanging upside down. Get me down from here! I'm going to be sick! The green team was taking the part of mission control. They saw an opportunity to really mess things up for the blues. Hey, turn off the electricity in the RMS arm, the leader said. Yes, sir, his teammate told him. His eyes lit up with delight. He knew the blues couldn't handle that. Killing RMS power now. Tish tried to come to Rudy's rescue and help Max. Relax, man. She looked over his controls to see if she could bring Max inside. The electricity went off in the RMS controls. Catherine switched on her radio and spoke to Control. This is Atlantis, Control. We're experiencing electrical failure in the RMS arm. Switching to backup power. That's my job, Kevin snapped at her. Not yours. On the cargo deck, Rudy opened the panel below the RMS controls. He checked the color-coded wiring against the diagram. It all looked like spaghetti to him. Here we go again, you know, Tish said, irritated, out of patience. It's the fat one, Rudy. I know what I'm doing, he retorted. It's the green one, next to the red. He grabbed the 2 wires and connected them. All the lights went out. 12. In the total darkness of the shuttle simulator, the blue team members roared in protest. I've got it now, Rudy announced triumphantly. There was a moment of silence. He connected 2 wires. Horns started wailing loudly, and deep red lights in the cabin blinked on and off. Catherine couldn't stand it any more. She got up out of her seat and headed for Rudy. Hey, sit down, Kevin told her. You belong here, not there. She ignored the order. She went to the cargo deck and pushed Rudy away from the electrical panel. Catherine, get out of there. I can do it, Rudy told her. She didn't move. At Mission Control, Andy grabbed the microphone from the Green Team commander. What's going on in there? She demanded. Out here it says there was another OMS burn. Kevin answered her. Pilot must have hit the switch when she got up. Why isn't she at her post? Andy asked. Too busy doing everyone else's job, Kevin told her. Then Andy looked at the simulation controls and could see that the shuttle was coming back to Earth. Out of orbit. You're falling out of orbit, shuttle. Orbit's decaying, Atlantis. You're going to be toast. The Green Team commander smiled gleefully. Pilot, do you copy? Pilot, Andy asked. Kevin was beyond caring. He only saw how funny this all was. He answered Andy's frantic call with his best answering machine voice. I'm sorry, Catherine can't get to the phone right now, but if you leave a message after the tone... You're in trouble, Atlantis. Roger that, Control, Kevin continued. Ladies and gentlemen, please return your seats and tray tables to their full upright and locked position, and... Andy threw open the door and entered the shuttle simulator. Zack followed her in. Stop it! All of you, stop it! She spoke with furious authority. There was silence. Then, somebody get me down from here, Max said. Zack went to release him from the RMS arm. It was Catherine, Tish began. I'm sorry, said Catherine. Rudy couldn't fix it. I could have if... Stop it! The excuses stopped. I don't want to hear it. I can't hear it. You know why? Because you're all dead. Aw, come on, Kevin began. You just disintegrated during re-entry. Don't you know what that means? You're all dead because you couldn't work as a team. She turned to Kevin. And you're responsible. Me? You're the shuttle commander. You're responsible for everything that happens on this ship. Yeah, well, I didn't ask to be responsible, remember? That's your excuse for killing 4 people? Kevin shook his head and laughed. I don't believe this. Nobody got killed. I mean, hey, this is only SpaceCamp. 13. Jinx scanned the computer monitor in front of him. At the top of the screen, it read, Launch Possibilities. Jinx was linked to the main computer. He shot some bytes into it. Roughly translated, what he said was, Tell me, main computer, if Max is in the shuttle during flight readiness firing, can something be done to put him into space? The computer's memory banks whirred for a nanosecond. Letters appeared on the screen. Thermal curtain failure. Tell me what you mean by thermal curtain failure, Jinx said. Thermal curtain failure is the failure of the heat shield during the engine test. When it fails, one solid rocket booster will ignite. If just one ignites, the whole shuttle will begin to flip like a pinwheel. That didn't sound to Jinx like anything that would put Max into space. Then what happens? To avoid that, the second solid rocket booster must be ignited. Result, perfect launch. Really? Really, the computer responded reassuringly. Jinx shot some more bytes into the computer and then unlinked himself. He hummed happily and then turned to roll back to SpaceCamp. Thermal curtain failure. Piece of cake, he said smugly. 14. Even Kevin was excited on the day of the flight readiness firing at Kennedy Space Center. The Blue Team members were all issued NASA coveralls and helmets with radios. They climbed into the elevator in the fixed service structure by the shuttle Atlantis. That is, the scaffolding that reached from the ground to the top of the shuttle, permitting workmen and astronauts to get to the ship. Okay, Blue Team, Andy instructed them. We are going to enter the shuttle and take our places in the command seats. We can talk to Mission Control through these short-range radios, and we will experience FRF. That's going to give you an indication of what it feels like to have 500,000 pounds of thrust under you. But we're not going anywhere. It'll all be over in 10 minutes. And remember, she paused for effect, but her campers finished the sentence for her. Don't touch anything. Andy smiled. At least her team had learned something. Down at ground level in Mission Control, nobody noticed Jinx as he rolled through the halls and entered the computer bank. Smoothly, he approached the plug bank and linked himself with the mainframe. Jinx stood by. When each of the team members had taken a seat, Andy strapped herself into the seat next to Rudy and spoke to Mission Control. "This is Space Shuttle Atlantis. Do you copy?" "Roger, Atlantis. This is Launch Control." Then another voice came over the radio. "Solid rocket boosters A and B, ignition off. Stand by for main engine test." "Roger, Control," Catherine answered. "Check satisfactory. Out." "All right," she said. "Stand by for FRF ignition. T minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Go for main engine start." The rumble began. It was unmistakable, and the team members were thrilled by the feel of the power. Steam began to billow up by the side of the shuttle. The rumble became louder. The shuttle vibrated and shook. There was a boom. The engines roared. Nothing they had learned at SpaceCamp had prepared the blue team for this kind of excitement. It was unbelievable. The launch director's calm voice came over the radio. "We have main engine start." In the darkened computer room, Jinx waited until it was time. Then he turned his arm once in the computer link and flicked a switch. T plus 7, 8. "Everything's looking good here. Main engine's at 100%. Test termination at T plus 25 seconds. 12, 13, 14. In the shuttle, the Blues were grinning with the joy of the experience. Nothing they said could be heard over the roar of the engines. 17, 18, 19. Suddenly, there was a blare of emergency horns. In Mission Control, red lights began flashing. "Overheat on solid rocket booster B." "Terminate the test," the launch director ordered. "The thermal curtain's failing." "Terminate." "Thermal curtain's failed. We have thermal curtain failure." "Solid rocket booster B, temperature is critical. It's going to light. It's lit." Suddenly, the joy turned to fear in the shuttle. The teammates all had vivid memories of the explosion of Challenger 10. They were terribly scared. "Catherine, get out of the seat. Let me sit there," said Andy. Quickly, they switched places. "Make them turn it off," Rudy cried. "They're trying," Andy assured him. Then she spoke to Mission Control. "Light booster A. Light them both and launch us. Quick." In Mission Control, Zach heard Andy. He knew she was right. He turned to the launch director. "Ignite booster A. Do it, or they're going to die." "Ignite booster A," the launch director instructed. "Roger. Booster A ignited," was the reply. When the second booster ignited, the roar became louder, but smoother, somehow less scary by being equalized. The steam and smoke from the ignition made it impossible for the Blues to see anything through the windows. They didn't see the access arm pull away. They were only vaguely aware of their upward motion as they accelerated into the blue sky. In Mission Control, Zach spoke for all of them. "Incredible. We have liftoff." Jinx stood by the computer monitor. The screen showed the shuttle as it rose slowly, majestically toward space. "Bye, Max," Jinx said. 15. The next few minutes were a critical test of all that the blue team had learned at SpaceCamp. While the shuttle accelerated to 18,000 miles per hour to reach an orbit 250 miles above Earth, they had to roll into proper position and release the solid rocket boosters as well as the external tank. Then they had to achieve main engine cutoff. All this at 3 times normal gravity because of their acceleration. The teammates were plastered into their seats by the gravity pool. They were going so fast that any movement they made took 3 times as much effort as on Earth. Still, they were shaking with fear. "Instituting roll maneuver, Atlantis," Mission Control told them, and the shuttle rolled over, almost upside down. "Roger, Control." Roll maneuver complete, Atlantis. You're looking good, Mission Control told them. There was more than a little surprise in the man's voice, along with relief. Copy, Control, Andy told them. This is Atlantis. Main engines at 65%. Over. The teammates were calmed by the assurance in Andy's voice. After all, they knew that she was a fully trained and tested astronaut. In fact, the only thing she'd never done was go into space. That would change today. Kevin, she said, startling him, we've got to drop the solid rocket boosters. The separator switches are on your side. Kevin was panicked. He had no idea what to do. Suddenly, everything he'd learned in SpaceCamp evaporated. Terrified, he stared at the panel in front of him. I don't know which ones. The left ones, Andy told him calmly. The whole bank. Atlantis, this is Control. Your go now for SRB separation. Hit them, Andy commanded. Kevin followed her order and flipped the switches. Control, this is Atlantis. We have SRB separation. Over. Catherine glanced out the window. She could see the long, silvery solid rocket boosters drop behind them, their parachutes carrying them gracefully to the ocean below. Roger, Atlantis, you have SRB separation. You are go for main engine cutoff. Over. There was a lot of static on the radio from Mission Control. In a minute we won't be able to hear them at all, Andy told the blue team. This bird wasn't flight ready. We only have short-range radio, and about now we're getting to be too far away for it. They can see us with their computers, but they can't talk to us. She yanked off the headset and studied the controls. Hey, Kevin, the main engines are off. Go for external tank separation. On my mark. Kevin reached for the proper control. 3, 2, 1. Mark! Kevin flipped the switch. Got it, he said. We have ET separation. The huge external tank separated from the shuttle and floated back to Earth. It would disintegrate on re-entry. Alone, the shuttle soared toward the great void of space, leaving Earth behind them. Suddenly, there was silence. The engines were still. Their motion was smooth. The only sound was the soft whir of the cabin cooling system fans. The 3G force that had held them prisoners in their seats was gone. They were in orbit. 16. Andy's headset floated off the floor. Kevin watched, wide-eyed. Catherine released her seat belt and was lifted smoothly into midair. She's floating, Kevin said unnecessarily. Good call, Kevin, Andy told him. You okay, Catherine? I could lose the liftoff, but this is unreal. Her face glowed with joy. Quickly, Rudy unstrapped himself. He rose straight up out of his seat. Slowly, surely, he began a series of well-executed flips and turns. With surprise, he realized that he had a grace in space that he'd never had on Earth. This was the place for him. He and Catherine turned to Tish, who was staring at herself in her makeup mirror. No wonder. Her wild earrings, no longer held by gravity, were sticking straight out from her ears. Her hair was even frizzier in space than on Earth. Tish groaned. Oh, no, I thought I was going to die, and now, like, people are floating. Maybe I'm already dead. Oh, I feel sick. Catherine giggled at her. She was pretty sure that once Tish really tried weightlessness, she'd love it. It was the ultimate in punk. I want to go home, Max announced. We'll go home, Rudy assured him. Come on, though. You've got to try this flying. Max undid his seatbelt. In a few seconds, his seat was 2 feet away and the ceiling was 2 feet closer. This was weird. Max liked it. He grinned. Tish put her mirror away and released her seatbelt too. Kevin floated past her. Love the earrings, Tish. She grinned. You all in one piece? Andy asked. They all nodded. Good. Let's discuss the situation. But she didn't have their attention. They were all staring out the window. Wow! Cosmic! Tish said. They stared at the blue and white ball beneath them. It was Earth. Let me see. Max squeezed through to the window. There's Mexico. Look! And America. There's Florida. Suddenly, Max was struck with a wave of homesickness. He held back the tears, but he couldn't stop his thoughts. "Andy, I want to go home," he cried. "I don't want to, ever," Rudy said, floating peacefully. "We're going home, Max," Andy assured him. "All of us. But you're going to have to help. You can do it, right?" Could they? 17. We have no contact with NASA, but they can still read our instruments. What they'll do is bring us down on automatic at the next available window, Andy told them. "There are windows out there?" Max asked. "It's not a real window," Catherine explained patiently. "It's where we re-enter Earth's atmosphere at the right time and place to be able to land at Edwards Air Force Base in California." Andy wedged her feet under the straps at the pilot's seat. The team knew that if her feet weren't strapped down, she'd just float out of the seat. Andy flipped the switches on the computer monitor and began typing on the keyboard. In a few seconds, she had the answer. "The first re-entry window for Edwards is in 12 hours. Then, just 2 hours after that, we'll be back on Earth. So, we just sit tight and keep everything running until then." It sounded simple, but each team member knew how long those hours could be. It was scary. In the empty computer bank room, Jinx once again linked himself to the main frame. He asked the computer how long it would be until Max returned. 14 hours. Estimated oxygen supply is 11 hours, 56 minutes. Jinx didn't need oxygen, but he knew that Max did. Every circuit in Jinx's body told him this was bad news. "Max will erase?" he asked. Probability 100%. This wasn't what Jinx had had in mind. At all. "Get Max out of space now," he ordered the computer. "How?" "NASA is working on the problem," the computer answered. That wasn't very encouraging to Jinx. "NASA needs help," he said, disconnecting his computer link. Jinx rolled off toward the door and down the hall to Mission Control. Up in the shuttle, Andy shook her head in frustration. She typed at the computer keyboard again, but each time the answer came up the same. She had to tell the Blues. Well, no oxygen was provided for the life support system. The oxygen supply, like the radio, was not intended for travel. We only have 12 hours worth of oxygen left, and there's no way we can get back to Earth in less than 14 hours. "Close is not good enough, is it?" Tish asked. "Nope, but there must be another solution." "I got it," Rudy said. "What about the fuel system? We can raid the liquid oxygen from there." "Nice try, Rudy," Catherine said. "But the fuel system uses nitrogen tetroxide, not pure oxygen. We want to breathe, not dry clean our clothes." Andy tried to focus them. "We have to think. Where can we get oxygen?" "I could run down to the 7-Eleven, Kevin joked. "Great idea," Andy told him. "Now if only there were 24-hour convenience stores in space where you could just pop in for a last-minute emergency resupply of..." That's it? I've got it." Like you want to share this with us?" Lish asked. "Sure," Andy said brightly. "We're going to Daedalus." Catherine understood. "The space station. Of course. They have oxygen storage." Then Andy was the commander again, snapping her orders briskly. "All of you, back to your stations. Rudy, Catherine, unstow the aft deck seats. Prepare for a roll." She keyed information into the computer and waited for its response. "I just hope we can make it in time." That's what they all hoped. 18. "Okay, Catherine, give me an ETA for the space station," Andy said 11 hours later. "Estimated time of arrival at Daedalus is..." She checked her course records. 26 minutes. "Okay, everything's looking fine." "Right, but Andy, even after we get the oxygen, how are we going to go through re-entry without help from Control?" "I have an idea about that," Tish interrupted. They looked at her. "You know how you said Mission Control can read all our instruments? Well, I was thinking, or maybe I was just like inspired, you know, with the view and all." "Tish, what idea?" Andy asked. "Oh, yeah, like code?" Like the CXT switch and like, well, code to flash on a monitor at mission control? That's a great idea, Andy said sarcastically. But then she realized what Tish was actually saying. You mean Morse code? Terrific. Does anyone know Morse code? Me, Tish said. You? I read it in a book once. Tish returned to the aft panels. She strapped herself in, reached for the CXT switch, and began tapping. The blue team was never so grateful for Tish's photographic memory. Now if only NASA would notice the signal. 19. When the Blues finally saw Space Station Daedalus, it didn't look anything like the model they'd tried to construct in the swimming pool at SpaceCamp. For one thing, it was assembled. The huge structure hung in space hundreds of miles above Earth. It was a beehive of interlocking grids, tanks, solar panels, and antennae. Tish had been tapping Morse code steadily, sure that eventually somebody at Mission Control would notice the pattern of flashes from the CXT switch. She glanced quickly at Daedalus and returned to her work. The monitor in front of her said, "Oxygen supply, 20 minutes." She didn't want to think about what that meant. "Okay," Andy told them as she floated toward the airlock door. "I'll be gone no more than 20 minutes. Don't talk any more than you have to. Don't move around unless it's absolutely necessary." They all knew what Andy meant. Talking and moving used up oxygen. They didn't have any to spare. Andy went into the airlock and pulled the door closed behind her. The blue team was left alone in the shuttle. "You know," Rudy babbled, "I once knew this guy. He could hold his breath underwater for hours. Nobody could ever figure out how he did it." "Rudy," Kevin said gently, "you're using up oxygen, man." "Yeah," Max added, "our oxygen." Rudy stopped talking. He waited for Andy's signal and then opened the cargo bay doors. In just a few seconds they could see Andy. They could see the look on her face through the huge helmet. It was joy. They all understood that getting oxygen was a matter of life and death for them. They also understood that this trip, that could well mean the end of all their lives, was the fulfillment of Andy's lifelong dream. She was an astronaut. Andy wore a jetpack on her back. She could make herself move in any direction by using the pack's controls. As the team watched, she carefully moved up to the storage grid on Daedalus and held onto a girder. Hand over hand she moved along the structure, searching for oxygen tanks. Suddenly, they saw her arm reach out and her thumb extend in the unmistakable thumbs up for success. "I see them," Andy's voice crackled over the radio. "Now I've just got to reach them." She started into the storage grid, but her jetpack was too big to fit in the entrance. Carefully, she removed the jetpack, tied it to a girder, and went in again. "I can't reach it," she said. The team watched, nearing panic. Andy tried again. She couldn't get far enough into the grid to reach the oxygen tanks. "It's no good. I can't get to it." "She has to," said Tish. "She can't, Tish," Kevin said. "Make her." "She's just not small enough," Catherine said, very scared. But she'd said the word. They all knew it when they heard it. The word was small. They turned around and looked at Max. He turned pale with fear. "Oh, no." Max looked from face to face at his teammates. "Max," Kevin reasoned, "you're the only one small enough. It's like an adventure, you know? Kevin needed inspiration. It came to him. "It's like a mission. This is your mission against the Empire. Luke, the princess needs your help. The rebels will fail without your force, Commander Skywalker." Kevin looked into Max's eyes, waiting. "I am ready," Max said calmly. 20. A few minutes later, Max was suited up in a giant white garment at least 10 sizes too big for him. He floated out to the cargo deck. "Commander Skywalker reporting in," he said to himself, climbing into the RMS arm's chair. He tried to forget what had happened to him the last time he'd been on the RMS arm with Rudy at the controls back at SpaceCamp. It seemed like that was a lifetime ago. Max just hoped Rudy had learned more about RMS controls during that lifetime. Then Max made a terrible mistake. He looked up. There, above the open cargo deck, was Daedalus. Beyond it, hundreds of miles away, Earth was suspended in space. It was too small and too far away. It was terrifying. "No way!" Max yelled. Then, "Hey, let me in! I've changed my mind!" "Max, you have to help Andy," Catherine reminded him over his headset. "Luke, Luke, remember the Force. Stretch out your feelings, Luke. The Force is always with you," said Kevin's voice. Max found that comforting. He strapped himself into the chair. Inside the shuttle, the team could hear Max speaking. They listened carefully. "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Help me." They all hoped old Ben would come to his aid. Very carefully, Rudy began the smooth movements that would carry Max to Andy. It was tricky, but Rudy had made enough mistakes at camp to learn something. There were bumps, loops, and slides in the trip, but Max got there, and that was what really mattered. Andy hadn't seen or heard him approach. When he tapped her on the shoulder, she shrieked in surprise. "I am Luke Skywalker," he told her calmly. "I'm here to rescue you." "Luke who? Oh, Max, you scared the wits out of me. Some rescue." He grinned. "Well, I got a mission, didn't I?" Andy nodded at him, and then watched as he floated right into the storage grid. In a few minutes, Max had one tank out of the storage grid and was going after another. "I'm going to put this one on the RMS arm, Max, while you get the other one out," Andy said. "I'm hurrying, Andy, honest," he told her. "I know you are," she said, watching the 12-year-old and knowing that all of their lives were in Max's hands. Inside the shuttle, Catherine warned Rudy, "Keep that chair steady." "He's doing the best he can," Kevin told her. "I know that, but she's trying to load the canister." Tish remembered Andy's warning about talking. "Could you guys argue without talking?" Then, almost as if in answer, a buzzer blared from the control panel and a red light began flashing. The cabin air system had shut down. "Well, that's it," Kevin said. "All the oxygen we have left is in the air, in the cabin." The Blues looked out the window again at Andy and Max. Max was still struggling to reach the second oxygen tank. Was he really moving in slow motion? 21. Then Max had the second tank. He tied a rope to it, but he couldn't get it loose from the storage grid. He tugged. He tugged again. Finally, he braced his feet firmly against the girder and pulled as hard as he could. Suddenly, the tank was released and came shooting out of the grid with such force that it pulled Max with it, toward outer space. Andy heard Max's cry and tried to grab him, but he was going too fast, and he had gone too far. She switched on the controls on her jetpack and chased after him. The jetpack was powerful, but it was never meant to go really fast. At first it seemed impossible for Andy to catch him. For a moment she thought she could grab his leg, but he couldn't stop spinning and she couldn't get a hold. Then she gave it everything she had. She stretched every inch of her body toward Max and was just able to touch his finger. But it was enough. She had slowed him down and could bring his spin and his forward motion under control. Quickly, she stopped him. He clung to her tightly while she used the jetpack to bring them, and the oxygen tank, back to the RMS chair. As fast as they could, they brought both tanks into the cargo bay of the shuttle and prepared to connect them with the air system. Andy knew that there were two deadlines. Not only were they almost completely out of oxygen, but they also had only a few minutes until it was time to begin their re-entry maneuvers. If they didn't re-enter now, they wouldn't have enough oxygen until the next window. There was no more oxygen on the space station. They had to make it. Max and Andy held the oxygen canister between them and stared at the 15 different valves and connectors in the cargo bay. It was Rudy's job as the team's mission specialist in equipment and operation to instruct them. The blue valve?" Rudy said over the intercom. "Which one, Rudy? There are two. We don't have time for a mistake." "It's the blue one next to the green." "There is no blue one next to a green." Rudy was panicking. He knew he had a hard time under pressure, and this was pressure. He studied the diagram in the book in front of him. Not green. I meant yellow. Pressed to the limit of her patience, Catherine grabbed the book from Rudy. Sorry, Rudy. We're going to be dead before you make up your mind. She checked the diagram. It's the blue valve next to the red one. That's the wrong diagram, Rudy cried. No, it's not, Andy. No, it's not. Andy, it's the red, Catherine said. Will somebody make a decision? Andy asked. It's the red, Catherine said, but Rudy contradicted her. Andy, I'm telling you, it's the yellow. I've been studying this book for 10 minutes. I know I'm right. Do it, Andy. Andy snapped the canister on the blue valve next to the yellow one and turned the knob. Everyone on the shuttle waited silently. Suddenly, there was a whoosh of air as the oxygen entered the life support system. The cabin fans whirred to life. They each breathed deeply and sighed with relief, all except Catherine. She was stunned by the enormous mistake she had almost made. She had been so sure of herself that she had been willing to stake 6 lives on it. And she'd have lost. Then she understood that teamwork was not just working together. It was also letting each member of the team do the things they'd been trained to do. She promised herself she'd never make that mistake again. 22. All that remained was for Andy and Max to connect the second canister and get back into the cabin. It seemed so simple. Okay, Max, I have it, Andy assured him. Get in the airlock. And Max? He turned to her. The princess thanks you, and I thank you. He grinned proudly and strutted towards the hatch and safety. Andy connected the second canister and turned the knob. There was a sudden hiss. The canister's hose filled up with oxygen so quickly and with such force that the canister broke loose and rammed into Andy's stomach. She was shoved all the way down the cargo bay and slammed into the end wall. She was stunned, knocked out, and floated helplessly up and out of the cargo bay, held only by her thin tether rope. Quickly, Max stepped out of the airlock and ran to pull Andy back to safety. But then he saw a shadow moving across the cargo bay, and he realized in horror that the huge overhead doors were closing while Andy was still outside. "What's happening?" he yelled helplessly. Inside the shuttle, the teammates worked frantically to open the doors, but nothing would work. "It's NASA," Catherine said. "They're bringing us down on automatic pilot." "Make them stop!" Tish was frantic. "Look at Andy!" Through the aft window they could see Max struggling to pull Andy in. But it was too late. The cargo bay doors were completely closed. Max was inside the cargo bay while Andy floated motionlessly outside, alone in space. The shuttle began moving smoothly toward its re-entry position, pulling Andy along behind it by the tether rope to certain death. "There's a manual override switch. I saw it," Catherine said excitedly. "Where is it?" "Oh, here it is. This is it." "If we override NASA, we'll miss the window," Kevin told her. "We have to go, now." "We won't have enough oxygen," Rudy reminded Catherine. "We can't leave Andy. She'll die," Tish said. Kevin knew the facts. He knew that each one of them was right. If they saved Andy, they'd miss the window and run out of oxygen. But if they didn't help Andy immediately... Kevin reached forward decisively. He hit the switch for manual override. "Rudy, open the cargo bay doors. Tish, unstow the medical kit. Max," he said into the radio, "we're opening the doors. Bring Andy in." Then he turned to his pilot. "Catherine, run a check on manual systems. We've got our work cut out for us." Within minutes, Andy was safely inside the cabin and strapped into one of the bunks. She seemed okay, if a little pale. They hoped she would regain consciousness soon. "Okay, everybody get back to your posts," Kevin ordered. "Tish, any luck at all with the Morse code signals?" "Nothing," she told him, "but I'll keep at it." "Roger," he said. "Max, you stay with Andy. Yell if she comes around." "Yes, sir." Kevin returned to his seat and began working with the computer. A few keystrokes confirmed his worst suspicions. They had missed the window to Edwards Air Force Base. They didn't have enough oxygen to last until the next window. "Great call, Kevin," he said out loud to himself. "You did the right thing," Catherine told him. "Sure, look where I got us." Andy's part of the crew. You took responsibility for her. For all of us. Somebody had to. You made a decision. That's what a commander does. That's why every team needs one. You're our commander, Kevin." It sounded corny, but he knew she was right. They finally were a team. "Hey, I hate to break this up, guys," Rudy said, "but I've got a question. Is Edwards the only giant lake bed where we can land this thing?" "We could try Russia," Kevin joked. "No, wait," Rudy said. "I thought I read somewhere that they landed the shuttle in White Plains." "In the middle of New York?" "No, Kevin, it's White Sands," said Catherine. "White Sands, New Mexico. You're right, Rudy." "So," Tish asked, "could we make the window to White Sands and land there?" Kevin's face lit up with excitement. "Tish, keep going on your Morse code. Make them hear us. Rudy, check out the coordinates. Let's see if we can navigate this bird ourselves. Yowie-woo! Are we unbeatable? Are we a team or what?" They each turned to do their own jobs. 23. Jinx rolled into the main room at Mission Control. "Jinx, help NASA! Jinx, help NASA! Must get Max back!" The technicians sitting at their computers ignored the robot. But Jinx didn't ignore anything. The flashing light on the CXT monitor registered on his scanners. Dash, dot, dash, dot, dash, dash, dash. Dash, dash, dot, dot, dash, dot, dash, dot, dash, dot, dash, dash, dash. Dash, dot, dash, dot, dash, dot, dash, dash, dash. Dot, dash, dot, dot. It just kept flashing. And then Jinx realized what it was. "Code," he squawked. Nobody heard. "Morse code." One technician turned to him. "Hush, Jinx. We're trying to save these kids." "Jinx, help NASA. Code says, come in control." "Code?" "Light flashing. Morse code." "Come on, Jinx. We're Hey, wait a minute. You're telling me we're getting a Morse code signal from the shuttle?" Jinx's dome light glittered. "Come in control." The technician grabbed a pencil and paper and followed Jinx to the flashing monitor screen. In seconds, the room exploded into activity. A dozen people huddled around the technician as he transcribed the message. "Request alternate landing. White Sands." Thousands of miles away in the shuttle, Tish tapped out her message again and again. "They're never going to hear this," she moaned. She didn't see the light above her head start blinking. She didn't see it when a second light started blinking as well, and a third. She took a break from her tapping and leaned back in her seat, staring up at the flashing lights. Now all the lights on the panel flashed together. The truth dawned on her. "Whip me, beat me, take away my charge plates! It's NASA! It's NASA! It's NASA! They heard us!" The Blues burst into a cheer together. Now there really was hope. Tish grabbed her pencil and started copying down their message. "Hey," she told Kevin, "they need an OMS burn, like, now." "One OMS burn coming up." Everyone scurried back to their places. There was work to do. "Window coordinates 113 by 17, Rudy announced. "Roger that," Catherine said, checking her notes. "We'd figured 250 by 19. Kevin grimaced. It would have been disastrous without NASA's help. But now they'd be okay. He was sure of it. Rudy took the next message from Tish. "Time parameter 0210. We have to be at reentry at 0210. That's in 6 minutes." Just then, Andy sat up a little from the bunk. "Max, get me a headset," she said. "She wants a headset," he announced. "I think she's going to be all right. Tell Zach that." "Good," Tish said. "Because Zach just asked why Andy wasn't at the controls. I was trying to figure out what to tell him so he wouldn't worry. I don't think he would have believed the one about the powder room." When Andy had her headset on, Kevin spoke to her. "Don't worry, Andy. We can handle it. You taught us real well. Max, get strapped in." On the flight deck, Tish looked at Kevin. Her eyebrows were raised, just like her earrings. "She taught us real well?" "Not me," he shrugged. "But we'll fake it, right, pilot?" he said to Catherine. But Catherine wasn't so positive. "I can't do it, Kev. I'm too scared." "Sure you can do it. What's the worst that can happen, huh? We'll all die. It's for sure that we'll die if you don't do it." "I can't." "No problem. I'll do it. Hey, Tish," yelled Kevin. "You ever memorize a book on how to fly this thing?" Catherine laughed. "All right. I'll do it." "Okay, team. Helmets on. Let's go for it. Coordinates locked in?" "Roger. Locked in," Rudy told him. 29 seconds and counting. "Hey, Max. We're going home." "OMS. Burn on my mark. 3, 2, 1. Mark." 24. Catherine took the control stick. She didn't have Kevin's confidence. The shuttle was very different from flying her father's single-engine plane. But Kevin was right about one thing. She had to try. "Re-entry in range. Prepare for 180 turn," Kevin said. "Standing by." "And go for turnaround." Gently, Catherine twisted the control stick. It was a perfect turn. "You are looking good," Kevin said admiringly. "Steady," Catherine told him. "We're passing through 135 degrees, on the way to 180. She twisted the stick and then brought it back. "I don't know if we came around enough." She twisted the stick some more, but something seemed wrong. "Oh, now, wait a minute," she said, frowning. "We don't have a minute," Kevin told her, watching the computer. "What's wrong?" "Look," Catherine said. And he did. Out the forward windows, the Earth was spinning around them at an unbelievable speed. But it wasn't the Earth that was spinning. It was the shuttle, and it was spinning and tumbling out of control. Catherine clutched at the control stick, but nothing she did seemed to help. "Catherine, make it stop!" Tish cried in fear. "Catherine, you're in a flat spin. You must recover," Andy told her. "I can't." Catherine was frantic. Kevin grabbed for the other stick and tried to help Catherine control the spin. "The trainer," he told her. "Remember the multi-axis trainer? You did it then. You can do it again." For a moment she closed her eyes. She had to stop panicking. When her mind was clear, she remembered that she had to find the center. That was the axis of her spin. If she could recognize that, then she could make the rest of the world balance to it, and they'd be out of the spin, if it wasn't already too late. Catherine opened her eyes. Yes, there it was. She found the center. She held tightly to the stick and, with Kevin's help, the shuttle finally stopped spinning. "Catherine," Andy said, "get the nose up. We have to go in at an angle. Otherwise we'll be going too fast and we'll burn up. Get the nose up." "Andy, please help me. I can't do it." "You have to." Kevin helped her. "Re-entry angle should be 30 degrees at least. We're at 26, 27. All right. Keep going. 28. They were giving it everything they had. But would it be enough? In horror, they saw that the nose of the shuttle was beginning to glow. It was red hot. 29. Catherine, come on. We're almost there. 30, Kevin said. "It's not holding," Catherine said. We're going to be toast," Tish wailed. On the ground at Mission Control, the technicians were staring helplessly at their monitors. "Zach," the launch director spoke. "It's the White House calling again. What do I tell them?" "Tell them to pray." In the shuttle, all eyes were on the controls. The gauge fell back from 30 to 29, 28, 27. It took all Catherine's might to pull the stick back. 28, 29. Still, the nose of the shuttle glowed red. Then the entire ship was engulfed in dreary gray. "We're dead," Tish sobbed. "This is being dead. We didn't make it." Suddenly the gray parted. Safely beneath them was the beautiful blue of the Pacific Ocean, and ahead of them was a familiar coastline. Nothing had ever looked more beautiful. "Oh, man, I love Los Angeles," Kevin said. He spoke for them all. "Mode select for Autoland," Catherine said. "Commander, would you be kind enough to set flap angle for landing?" "My pleasure, pilot. Flap angle set. Speed brake at 20%. "Nice work, Commander." "Nice work yourself." Finally, the radio sparked to life. "Atlantis, do you copy? Come in, Atlantis. Do you copy?" Roger that, Control. This is Atlantis. The blue team could hear the cheers at Mission Control. They joined them with their own. Now there was only a short trip left, and with the careful guidance of the two T-38 jet airplane escorts the Air Force supplied, the Blues knew it would be smooth sailing the rest of the way. Max thought of his first day at SpaceCamp. He remembered the strange collection of misfits and weirdos that fate had given him for a team. They weren't a team then, but they sure were one now. It felt very, very good. This is your narrator, Jon Olsen. Thank you for listening to the novelization for young readers of SpaceCamp, which was a film that came out in 1986. It came out after the Challenger shuttle exploded, even though the film was shot before that happened. And partially as a result of that tragedy fresh in everybody's memory, and partially as a result of the film being really effing bad. SpaceCamp, the movie, was something of a flop. And even though it's from the right era of film for someone my age to feel automatic nostalgia for it, I find it unbearable to watch. I hope you found my reading of it tolerable. Thanks again for listening to Audiobooks for the Damned. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye.